So I will talk about the ongoing master thesis of Mr. Batista Zumba, undergrad student of the Faculty of Engineering of Porto University. And I am Rui Alexio, and I'm currently working at CERIS. Let's see. Before moving, I would like to call your attention for this event, the Water Summer School, that will be held in the Free University of Bolzano in Italy. It's a hands-on training event that devoted to experimental techniques in hydraulics and fluid mechanics. We have the provisional program, and I would like to call your attention for the lectures on large-scale PIV and on field measurements that will occur during this event. So if you are interested, please apply to this event. I think it's quite formative and and you can learn a lot during these 5 days of workshop. So moving on, we promised to bring you measurements of a jet of velocimetry in a dissipation jet basin. So this is the model we are working in the laboratory. We have a stepped spillway here, which forms a jet at the end of these sky buckets, and it generates this erosion pattern. So here we can see the installation working with the basin, the stepped spillway, everything very well. And first, some years ago, we started studying on this. We decided so we need to characterize the jet trajectory. So we developed some imaging-based methods to characterize the jet trajectory and see where the jet was impinging in the basin. Then that was not enough. We wanted to know more, so we needed to characterize the scour geometry. So we implemented some structure promotion techniques in order to describe the 3D configuration, which is an interesting thing to do, especially because there is free software available to do this. And we can use a regular like a consumer grade camera or a cell phone to take the pictures and obtain the reconstructed 3D geometry. And we did this and we were very happy. We managed to study the evolution of the scour hole in time, etc. But of course, we wanted more. So this year thesis was about the velocimetry and about measurements of the velocity field in the dissipation basin. In this case, the surface velocity. And so we used an action camera with a acquisition rate of 60 frames per second, which was okay for this kind of velocity scales. Since these cameras, they deform the image because of the wide angle lenses they have, we made some software, homemade software to correct the distortion. To calculate the velocity field, we use the MATPIV MATLAB package. And we use styrofoam spheres with a D50 of about 3 millimeters as a tracer. And here we have a photo that will be probably in the Batista Zumba's master thesis. And of course, we defined the total duration of the test of about 3 hours, which was about the time for to reach the equilibrium of the scour. We divided these 3 hours in the instants, and we measured the velocity for this instance and also the bed geometry for this instance. And our idea is to try to correlate the information from the velocimetry with the information from the bathymetry. So these are some short movies of different instances of the flow. We see the seeding, the patterns of the seeding, which are also very interesting on their own. And basically, Batista's thesis is exploring this data to obtain the velocity field on the surface. Of course, we can create an animation with these, with the instantaneous velocity. Now the water is going down the stepped spillway. It should be reaching in about some more seconds, and we start seeing the velocity, the jet hitting the water and the patterns that are generated. This is okay. We can continue here, but this is just to show we can resolve these measurements in time. Then we calculated for those designated instants the mean velocity from 120 for the time equals 120 seconds, and then for 240 seconds after opening after starting the water, 600 seconds, etc., etc. And we can see the existence of two very well defined vortexes in the velocity field. We then decided to choose these 2 points close to the vortex in order to, using the fast Fourier transform, Fourier analysis, to determine what is the frequency of oscillation of these vortexes. And we noticed that even with time, the frequency is quite stable. So these are quite stable structures that seem not to be affected by the evolving geometry in the bed, nor with the flow rate, which in this case it's steady. But the fact that the bed changes, but the frequencies are more or less the same, this is something that we found interesting. Baptiste is now doing some other cases with a different flow rate and a different water height in the Stilling basin. And of course, we can, from the mean velocity fields, we can calculate the vorticity, where the signature of the vortices is well presented. And this is the results that we now obtain when we conjugate the velocity field, the black arrows, with the topography that we measure at each instant by photogrammetry, by structure from motion. And this is the result we obtained. And since this is an ongoing work, to be over soon, we hope, we can get quickly to the conclusions that some measurements of the velocity field in the jet dissipation basin were carried. We use surface PIV to measure the velocity field and structure from motion to compute the bed geometry at certain instants. The time series analysis of the velocity at specific points allowed to determine the vortex's oscillations frequencies. And for the times analyzed, we can see that this oscillation frequency remains roughly the same. We are continuing to process this data. Some of the ideas we got from this workshop are quite inspiring, and we will try to apply those ideas to our dataset. Before concluding, also call the attention for that Professor Rui Ferreira mentioned yesterday about the 6th workshop on river and sedimentation hydrodynamics and morphodynamics, where we are proposing a dam bridge benchmark, where we are going to model physically a dam bridge, and we are asking to the modelers to model this case and then compare the numerical model results with the experimental results. Velocimetry velocities will also be measured, and also the configuration of the bridge, etc. This is the references quoted during the presentation, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Roy. That was very good timing. So I think we have a few extra minutes for questions. Does anybody have a question for Roy? If not, maybe I can ask. I was surprised to see so clear patterns of velocity, looking at how the tracers were displaced by the jet, and also how they were accumulating at some areas. And somehow I think it's similar to what Fabio was showing. I don't know if you saw his presentation earlier, but with the hydraulic jumps in the bed of bars. So I was wondering, have you got any solution for that? How do you?
Essentially, this is a sort of outcome of doing the average, the conditional time average, because when we have the instantaneous flow fields, and by applying, if we apply the PIV filtering, and if we reject the signal, the data that has not a good signal to noise ratio, we see that we have some holes in the images. Of course, we can, in the instantaneous fields, we interpolate the velocity on those fields. But for the mean velocity, what we do is we do a conditional average. We just average in the points where we have data. So this allows us to have this complete image and very beautiful, but maybe a bit artificial, of the flow for now at these points to characterize the vortexes and their geometry, their dimension. this is okay, but we are aware that there are some tricky points regarding the seeding, the lack of seeding, because as we saw on the images, on those small movies, sometimes we don't have the seeding because the jet is carrying, and we have to continuously feed the experiment with seeding. So by observing the footage and doing this conditional average, we are able to do that. Of course, limitations applied if we want to have a very well and precise time resolved at some points where there is no seeding. The points that we chose to measure the frequency were the ones we saw that more or less during all the experiment we had seeding there, so it should be okay.
Yeah, I was wondering, in that case, do you see, I mean, where all the seeding is coalescing?
Yes.
Does that kind of have an effect on the dynamics that you measure?
That will be something that we want to study maybe in the near future, which is to we started first with the stilling basin with a simple layer of seeding. And we wanted to see what was the pattern when the jet started, what was the pattern formed, and more or less what is the time of residence of the seeding inside the basin. Because downstream there is the discharger, so the circuit is closed, so it's pumped back upstream. And we wanted to see how much time do we have the seeding inside the stilling basin in our setup. This is something that we haven't analyzed yet, but it is a promise to be analyzed in the near future, because this thesis was about velocimetry measurements. But the idea of having the possibility to study the residence times, which can be useful for studying, for instance, pollutant dispersion, and the fact that I have some recirculation zones that trap sediments, pollutants, whatever in that area, that is an interesting topic that will be, let's say, a collateral effect of this research for the moment.
Thank you. Thanks, Ray, very much.
Thank you.